Bienvenidos al webinar Conectividad con Sentido, RedCLARA y las redes avanzadas para la ciencia, tecnología e innovación, el cual se desarrolla en el marco del proyecto ISEED, Ciencia Inclusiva y Democracias Europeas. El Ministerio de Educación y Cultura participa en este proyecto a través de la Dirección de Cooperación Internacional y Proyectos en varios de sus componentes de trabajo. Esta actividad se enmarca en el componente 7, difusión, investigación e innovación responsable. A continuación, transmitiremos un video explicativo del proyecto ISEED y sus objetivos. Recordamos que contamos con servicio de traducción a través de intérprete tanto en español como al inglés, cuya opción podrán encontrar en la barra inferior del Zoom.
Citizen science invites people to do science. To help produce
La
science.
ciencia invita a las personas a producir conocimiento científico, también para aplicar y regular los resultados de la ciencia. La ciencia ciudadana es inclusiva, incluso si uno no tiene trasfondo científico, puede participar para hacer y regular ciencia. La ciencia inclusiva y las democracias europeas buscan aprender sobre cómo co-creamos la ciencia para guiar a la inclusión de las personas en las democracias deliberativas. ¿Cómo podemos aprender de la ciencia ciudadana para tener democracias más inclusivas en Europa? Somos 12 instituciones socias en distintos países de Europa y América Latina, que mancomunan sociólogos y filósofos y curadores de museos y asesores de gobiernos. Para saber más sobre ISEED, vaya a nuestra página de Facebook o haga clic en nuestro sitio web. ISEED, Ciencia Inclusiva y Democracias Europeas.
En esta oportunidad contaremos con la participación de Luis Cárdenas, Mariela de León y Gabriel Kaplun. El ingeniero Eduardo Grampín lamentablemente no va a poder estar debido a una actividad académica que le coordinaron posteriormente a la misma hora de este webinar. Luis Cárdenas es el director ejecutivo de RedCLARA, tiene reconocida experiencia en el mundo de las redes académicas y la escena de las TICs. Mariela de León es la directora del Servicio Central de Informática de la Universidad de la República, que desarrolla y da soporte a todos los sistemas de gestión de la UdeLar y es el operador de la red académica del Uruguay. Gabriel Kaplun es comunicador, magíster en educación, doctor en estudios culturales latinoamericanos, docente e investigador de la Universidad de la República del Uruguay, integrante del Sistema Nacional de Investigadores. Actualmente coordina un equipo interdisciplinario de investigación y desarrollo sobre participación ciudadana digital. Adelante.
Si me permiten, voy a compartir mi pantalla. Muy buenos días a todos. Gracias por esta invitación. Es un placer poder compartir con ustedes algunas ideas y un poco del trabajo que venimos haciendo en RedCLARA y en las redes de investigación y educación latinoamericanas y del Caribe. Primero quisiera iniciar por explicar lo que estamos en proceso de desarrollar a través del último proyecto que estamos desarrollando en cooperación con la Unión Europea, que es el proyecto VELA. Y un poco esto creo que puede poner en contexto de qué manera, cuál es el impacto de las redes de investigación y educación en los temas de desarrollo de conocimiento, de investigación y de creación y generación de capital humano, ¿no? Un poco la visión que tenemos y la manera en que lo venimos trabajando es el concepto de creación de un ecosistema digital regional de investigación, educación e innovación. La razón de trabajar esto desde la perspectiva ecosistémica tiene que ver con el desarrollo tan acelerado que recientemente han tenido todas las tecnologías de la transformación digital y el rol que están jugando no solo la conectividad, sino otros componentes, como es el caso del manejo de datos o la capacidad de procesamiento de datos o el uso de tecnologías de distinta naturaleza, que todas deben de alguna manera interactuar o integrarse para poder sacar provecho a la plataforma que hemos venido construyendo a nivel regional. RedCLARA tiene, este año cumple 20 años de su fundación. Inició en el año 2003 a partir de esfuerzos de las redes nacionales de investigación y educación de aquel momento, 13 redes nacionales, que buscaban desarrollar una infraestructura de conectividad directamente entre ellas, ya que a ese momento la única manera que tenían de intercambiar tráfico, de recibir información o de interconectarse entre sí era yendo a través de los puntos de conexión que habían en Florida, cosa absolutamente subóptima desde el punto de vista de costo y de inversión. Y a partir del trabajo que desde los años 90 venía haciendo el Foro Latinoamericano de Redes Académicas, se firma en el año 2003 en el Valle del Bravo un acuerdo para desarrollar una infraestructura de carácter regional que conecte a estas 13 redes nacionales de investigación y educación. A partir de allí, pues hemos desarrollado una infraestructura realmente sólida, que tiene un impacto muy relevante en términos de lo que se puede hacer en el ámbito de investigación y de cooperación, en particular con Europa, por los recientes proyectos y también porque tradicionalmente RedCLARA ha sido financiada y apoyada de forma muy sostenida por la Comisión Europea. Y un poco en ese contexto quiero centrar un poco mi presentación, porque esta noción de ecosistema digital lleva la problemática de la conectividad de centros de investigación y universidades a un ámbito mucho más extenso que solo la conectividad. Estamos hablando de que los ecosistemas son, digamos, modelos inclusivos y abiertos donde la sociedad en general participa. Y cuando hablo de la sociedad en general, hablo de empresas privadas, hablo de comunidad civil, hablo de gobiernos, hablo de empresas y hablo de academia. Y eso implica una interacción importante en el marco de un contexto que está hecho para el desarrollo de actividades de investigación y de educación, para poner esa capacidad que hemos ido construyendo a nivel regional al servicio de esos actores en cada uno de los países donde están conectados. Es un concepto mucho más elaborado y avanzado que el tema solo específicamente de conectividad, que tiene una base muy importante en varios componentes. Uno obviamente es lo que nosotros llamamos conectividad con sentido, que es la idea de tener conectividad que sea productiva desde el punto de vista de la solución de problemas y retos que tiene la región o que existen a nivel global. Estamos hablando también de un sistema, digamos, centrado en el ser humano que permita la interacción entre agentes sociales y infraestructuras digitales para crear valor a partir del acceso a los datos compartidos y de una plataforma que requiere de grandes capacidades de cómputo para efectivamente utilizar toda la tecnología de transformación digital en los procesos de investigación y de desarrollo de actividades educativas. Desde hace muchos años hemos venido nosotros trabajando y proveyendo capacidad a ciertas áreas de la ciencia que requieren enormes volúmenes de transmisión o de capacidad de transmisión de información, como es el caso de la física de altas energías, como es el caso de los observatorios astronómicos, pero esos no son los únicos casos en los cuales se requiere una infraestructura especial para poder desarrollar iniciativas relevantes en este sentido. La Unión Europea ha desarrollado un programa muy interesante y muy importante a nivel global, que es el programa Copérnico, por ejemplo, y esto lo uso solo como un ejemplo. El programa Copérnico genera información sobre la Tierra continuamente a través de varios satélites llamados centinelas que circundan la Tierra continuamente, van generando imágenes y esos datos, desde el momento que se lanzaron los primeros satélites, han venido generando ingentes cantidades de datos sobre fotos de infraestructura, datos sobre la imagen que se puede tomar desde los satélites de la Tierra, y eso es un material enormemente valioso para hacer predicciones, para trabajar en temas de riesgo climático, para manejar y trabajar más eficientemente, por ejemplo, la producción agrícola en los países, para indefinida cantidad de acciones que tienen valor tanto desde el punto de vista de los participantes privados como de los participantes públicos que pueden acceder a estos datos. Y una gran parte de la reciente evolución de la conectividad entre Latinoamérica y Europa tiene mucho que ver con la posibilidad de transmitir estos datos y replicarlos en dos grandes centros de datos en Latinoamérica, uno en Chile y uno en Panamá. La semana pasada hicimos un taller en Montevideo de la Academia Copérnico, donde estamos buscando sensibilizar y formar investigadores y ciudadanos en general en los potencial o el potencial que tiene el acceso a estas herramientas para este tipo de aplicaciones que yo les acabo de mencionar. Y entre otras cosas, algunas aplicaciones interesantes que hemos venido diseñando y pensando para esta articulación en el ecosistema, por ejemplo, es la posibilidad de que en el caso de Uruguay, las dependencias de Uruguay puedan usar Copérnico en sus comunidades para la apropiación de su propio territorio y para una comprensión mejor de lo que está sucediendo en cada una de las partes, digamos, territoriales de Uruguay. Esto es un esquema que hemos venido comenzando a diseñar a partir de un trabajo colaborativo que estamos teniendo con el gobierno de El Salvador para esta temática y del cual les voy a hablar un poco más adelante. Pero en términos del ecosistema digital, nuestra definición de ese ecosistema implica apertura, inclusividad, neutralidad a todos los elementos, es decir, al género y a cualquier otro componente que pudiera sesgar la participación de actores.
And the possibility of having anyone join and exchange and produce value through the ecosystem. Now, this is an image I think is very clear about the connectivity in RedCLARA. You see connectivity between Brazil and Portugal here, and this was the most recent phases where we were able to deploy a submarine cable between the continents. There was a very old cable before that connected both continents, and practically all the communications between Europe and Latin America had to go through the United States. Now, based on this new cable, which is the only one that is connecting us, we now have a direct connection between both continents. And from our point of view, this direct connection represents um, a sort of digital embrace. And in the summit of heads of states in Brussels, there was the announcement made that also enabled us to continue developing our cooperation between the continents from the scientific and educational point of view. Now, as you may see, we also have a very robust infrastructure that connects a good deal of the Latin American countries. However, we still don't have connectivity in the Caribbean, but part of our objectives in this project phase is to connect all the Caribbean islands. Initially, we're going to work with the main Antilles, and then we will move on to the other Antilles. This initially, I believe, would enable us to connect to regional and international agendas, such as the digital agenda promoted and developed by the ECLAC, of which nowadays Uruguay is the pro tempore president, and then later on, Chile will become the president in 2024 in the next meeting. But all the objectives that we are pursuing in RedCLARA and the national networks are completely aligned with the digital Latin American and Caribbean agenda, which have to do with filling the training gaps for human capital across the region, providing support for inclusive connectivity and significant connectivity. And we also want to contribute to having digital transformation projects and processes that are the most beneficial and productive for the development interests for economies and societies of the region. So I wanted to highlight this component as one of the elements in our infrastructure. which is the one of supercomputation. Here are where we have the Latin American supercomputation spaces, where the computation centers can be accessed and used through our infrastructure. From Mexico in the Simba Steppe, which is the first center from the north to the south, we have the Simba Steppe. We have the Cabre supercomputer in Costa Rica. Then we have the one of the Industrial University of Santander. Then we have the big centers in Brazil, Santos Dumont, and the other one that I don't remember the name, which are the supercomputer centers in Brazil. Then we have Universidad de la República of Uruguay that actively participates in this supercomputing network. And I think it's Universidad de la República that deals with this. And we have Argentina that has a center at the UBA or close to the UBA. And now we have a new supercomputer that is part of the top 100 supercomputers in the world, which is Clementine. And then we have the NLHPC, which is the one of the University of Chile. So the integration of connectivity with computing capacity and data management is what enables a digital ecosystem. The rest can be articulated, such as Internet of Things or 5G technologies or other connectivity technologies, are things that we can build around a very strong layer that has to do with data infrastructure. And beyond connectivity, data management is fundamental for Latin America to have its own agenda for the development of digital technologies and learn from those technologies, applying them properly. A lot of people say that gold in the future will be data. The problem is that data needs to obtained in a way that can be exploited and taken advantage of in the best way possible. And those are things that we have not yet been able to build in the region. We still don't know how to manage data access in order to create more room for value creation and solutions. Now, this structure is integrated within a global infrastructure, which we call it the Education Research Global Network. And here you can see the connections between Latin America, Africa, Europe, North America, Oceania, and Asia. And they all have an intense activity in the use of these technologies and platforms. In particular, one of the most developed ecosystems is the European ecosystem with its European network of national connectivities. But we cannot leave behind others or leaders in this area, which are the Canadian and American networks and the Asian networks in Japan, in Australia, and in New Zealand. And this constitutes a collaboration community that we, based on this notion of ecosystem, are trying to better articulate. I always talk about this problem as a problem of the last organizational mile. What we are trying to correct here is that connectivity in itself is not enough. Having capacity to connect to continents can create certain things, sure. It can generate certain things through natural inertia, but the most reasonable way of doing this is to have articulation between organizations, and that possible cooperation between those organizations is what will truly create value for the region to produce solutions and services. But that requires this idea of the last organization mile. We don't just have to look at the cable and the data centers. because the most fundamental thing for us to have is interaction between the stakeholders that collaborate around that platform. And the global capacity that we have, especially the one that we have in Europe, is very important and very relevant for us. We have a great infrastructure and research centers that are part of programs of investment to create big infrastructures that provide data with free access. So this doesn't require connectivity to commercial internet. We're talking about on-grain initiatives, such as the one that we have in Brussels and in a large part of Europe. That has to do with research in mental health using detailed information from the human brain. We also see the Human Brain Project continuation. The Human Brain Project became a large research infrastructure that it brings together scientists from across the world who do research on topics pertaining to the brain. And based on that, they get abundant data for the support of their organizations and research. And then together with that, we have what we have been historically doing, which is cooperating with the CERN in the area of physics. And then we have LifeWatch, which is a project that deals with biodiversity and uses big databases to manage that biodiversity. And in that European network, we have around 10,000 higher education institutions participating. So all the relevant universities are connected there. And developing that last organizational mind can have significant potential for all of our region at the same time that we can also contribute to what they're doing. So, those are the general notions that I wanted to share with you. And this is a bit of where we are. And the project that we are developing, which is the Bella 2 project, this notion of digital ecosystem, what we are looking for is to develop a set of investments with a total budget of 28 million euros. And we want this to be directed through these large components. We want co-investment between the private sector, the government, and Mela to develop new infrastructure. But we always want to be focused on the level of social impact of that connectivity, and we want those investments to actually have a considerable impact in the reduction of the digital gap. Now, I wanted to share a couple of use cases. For example, what we're doing in El Salvador is we are working on three main lines of work with the government. One of them has to do with monitoring and developing use cases for smart agriculture to perfect and improve the production capacity of the country and the better use and leveraging of their natural resources. And for that, we are integrating different stakeholders in a pilot project where by using AI and IoT technologies, we might be able to generate a model that will enable the El Salvador government properly manage data and information required at the national level to make smart decisions for the production of food products and the management of health risk. Another thing we're doing in El Salvador is we're working with an interesting program in order to produce changes in the El Salvador communities. As you know, the El Salvador maras have been very quickly disappearing, but they had generated a critical situation in El Salvador before. I visited El Salvador several times because I was living in Guatemala for a while. And about 3 or 4 years ago in El Salvador, you couldn't walk the streets at ease. No one could. And eventually, a lot of people in El Salvador felt that they were imprisoned in their houses. But a couple of weeks ago, I was in El Salvador and I went outside at 8 p.m. and now nothing happened. So it's truly surprising to see those changes. However, apart from that, the government has a clear digital agenda which incorporates a multiplicity of elements, such as the development of these initiatives that they have called cubes, which are freedom and opportunity urban centers integrated in El Salvador communities so that communities can have a space to learn about digital technologies, experiment with elements, have information programs, and other initiatives that might help them generate more robust interaction model between themselves and between them and the country.
trabajando en esta idea que ahora
And in
mencioné,
that sense, we are working on
pensando plantear en Uruguay,
this
es
idea that we might be able to share this in Uruguay,
centro donde se haga un monitoreo continuo
where
de cada
we might be continuously monitoring
ese cubo en particular que está en una localidad específica dentro de El Salvador por factores que están
so
asociados
that we might
tanto
do it
a
in
factores
specific communities in El Salvador
ambientales
that are
como puede
connected
ser
to
el
possible
cloro,
climate
primero
and
que nada el
environmental
cloro,
risks. So in that way, we
una
first
actividad
build
diaria con
capacity,
esos
we
centros
generate activities in those
promover el
centers,
desarrollo
and then we allow
para que
for
en el
people
monitoreo
to
se
properly
pueda dar
appropriate
una
those
apropiación por las personas
skills.
de lo que son estas tecnologías avanzadas. No requieren una gran formación, no tienen que ser
This
ingenieros.
doesn't really call for a lot of training. People don't need to be engineers to use
Desde
the
Chile
data available in
y desde nuestro
Copernicus
espacio
and
digital.
look at what is happening
Eh,
around them.
otro elemento que estamos trabajando con ellos es
Another
la
element that we are
posibilidad de
working on
incorporar
with them is the possibility of
antenas
using
satélites,
IoT technology
antenas de satélite Starlink para
for
intercambiar información ambiental
the monitoring
con
of
antenas
environmental information so that the environment ministry can
variadas
be
que nos permitan dar
informed
anticipación a la hora de monitorear la condición ambiental del territorio, evitando
about
también
the
por efecto
environmental
Copérnico. Y un ejemplo
situation in
es
the
lo que es más
country.
terrestre,
And another
en el
example that
monitoreo
is
podemos
more
hacer un
regional
punto, y es uno de los modos que hemos encontrado de poder lograr articulación entre los actores,
and which has
es
allowed
muy
us to have
pronto iremos
articulation between the
a
stakeholders is to have a hackathon or an ideathon about
trabajando
food
problemáticas como por
safety,
ejemplo
specifically to
de
work
desabastecimiento.
with the issue of the dry
Hemos
corridor in
hemos
Central
logrado beneficiar a
America,
mucha gente anualmente
which kills a lot of
problemáticas
people annually
por incapacidad para
because
distribuir las
of
canastas alimentarias
a lack
de
of
esas personas
capacity
en
to
ese lugar.
build and
Igual
cover
en Panamá
the
hubo
food
un
needs
ejemplo que estamos
of
trabajando
the
con
people in the
la
region.
Secretaría de
In
Ciencia y
Panama,
Tecnología
we're working
en
with the
temas
SENESID, the National
de innovación y
Science and
vinculación,
Technology
por un lado, la
Secretariat,
integración de lo que va a ser el
for
nuevo
the
Copernicus en
integration
el marco del
of the
manejo
new
de lo que tiene que ver
Copernicus
con sostenibilidad
Center
del Caribe desde el punto de vista del monitoreo
in
ambiental
Panama
y
that will
adicionalmente
provide satellite
trabajamos
monitoring.
con dos proyectos que son de interés de Panamá, que
And
son
we are
precisamente
working with
los
two
dos
projects that are of interest to
proyectos
Panama, which is
de
the use of
antenas de interferencia estelar
supercomputation
para
and
apoyar el
AI
desarrollo de
technologies
esta
for the support
investigación
of the development
que
of the
será
Vaccination
por la
Research
Secretaría del Interior
Center
y CENESID,
that will be developed by the Secretariat as
fue un
part of
crecimiento
the
voluntario
National
y
Science and
para utilizar
Research System.
precisamente estas tecnologías para apoyar
And these technologies will
el
also be
monitoreo del agua,
used
que es un
for the
problema
monitoring of water,
crítico para Panamá
which is a
debido a la magnitud
critical
del mar
resource
fuerte de
for
Canarias
Panama, given
y
the
las
impact of
necesidades
climate change in
del
the
país.
channel.
Esas dos cosas muestran o esos dos países y esos
Now,
que
these
puse muestran
examples
la
that I shared
capacidad
with
que
you
tenemos
show the potential
de
of what we're doing.
el rol de nuestras redes, aparte de la conectividad,
So,
es,
the role of our
es
networks, apart from
lograr
connectivity, is providing
articular
articulation, is
colaboración política
achieving the
con
goal of having
actores
stakeholders connect so they may build
muy,
solutions
muy relevantes para la
for
región.
critical issues
Y
that
en
are
ese
of the utmost
aspecto,
relevance for
nuestro
the
rol, como
region.
bien
And in that
es
context,
funcionar
our role as a
como un
regional
eje
network
central
is
de la
to
transformación
articulate
para lograr
networks at the global
identificar
level,
capacidades
to
donde
identify
las
capacities
soluciones similares
for the development of similar solutions to those that I just mentioned. Latin America has an enormous cooperation tradition, especially in the high development computation area. We have been working with the Barcelona Supercomputation Center, and we are trying to develop new supercomputation networks across the region, including quantum computing centers. And the centers in Europe can cooperate with the ones in Latin America so that all of this can be at the service of the development of solutions. So this is what we mean by connectivity with meaning. There are other things that we're doing in Peru, but I don't want to bore you. I think I spoke too much about what we want to do. And finally, the strategic axis of the work is we're trying to build a space that truly articulates, that is more and more complex with each day, so that it might respond to the demands of the environment and of our countries. I hope my presentation was useful and clear in terms of what we do and what we want to achieve in the region.
Muchas gracias, Luis,
Thank you very
por
much,
tu
Luis.
presentación
Thank
y
you for
tiempo.
your presentation and for your
Continuar con las
time.
exposiciones y a
Let us
continuación
continue with
haremos
the
como
presentations,
las
and then at
aclaraciones.
the end,
Un minuto
we
para hacer
are going to give
preguntas
you some time
y
for
así
questions.
que por favor adelante.
Continúo yo.
I'll go.
Soy Mariela de León del
I am Mariela de
de la
León
Universidad de la
from the
República.
Central IT Service of UdeLar, and I am here to represent the
Y en
Uruguayan
particular
Academic Network, and in particular of Coordinator Eduardo Grampin, who
por eso.
apologizes but could
Yo
not
voy a
be
hacer una
here
presentación muy
today.
breve de la red
I'm
académica
going to share a
uruguaya
very
para
brief
después agarrar
presentation of the academic network in Uruguay, who will then be explained by Gabriel Kaplun.
de la red académica uruguaya. La red académica uruguaya nace
The
en
Uruguayan
1990
Academic
en
Network was founded in 1990 by the Universidad de la República, which is the biggest public university in Uruguay. It has around 100,000 active students and over 10,000 research professors. And that is why we launched this network, to have professors be connected among themselves and with the world. And the infrastructure of this network and the management and operation of this network is conducted through the central IT service, which is the IT system of the institution. And in the 90s, Ida Holes and her team, made up of several researchers, among which are Sergio here, decided to create this network. And then later on in 2003, the network became a founding member of RedCLARA to keep national academic networks in Latin America connected. The RAU, which is the Academic Network of Uruguay, initially works on technical aspects, but in time it transformed and it became a space for communication, integration, and discussion for the transformation goals of society. So in that context, beyond creating connectivity, the UdeLar decides in 2022 to create a new network by transforming its governance. So we are not just looking at a network that is solely managed by the Universidad de la República, but we also want to bring in other organizations into the discussion of its governance. We are now undergoing that transformation process, and Coordinator Eduardo Grampin is trying to generate a new way to manage and govern the academic network so that it might bring in more research and education and civil society organizations.
También tenemos junto con Eduardo, como objetivo.
Among one of our first goals is the inclusion of Uruguay in the BELA project, and that is something that we have been working on together with RedCLARA, who is providing us with support in this process. We're working with other institutions of RedCLARA and of the country to make progress
Uruguay y de las instituciones de educación.
so that we might include Uruguayan research organizations in the BELA network. So that is my presentation for today. I just want to note that we are available if you need anything, and we want to thank you for inviting us to this event. And now I yield the floor to Gabriel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mariela, for that presentation. So what Eduardo had asked me to do was to talk a bit about the work that we have been doing with a team that Eduardo himself created many moons ago. Because at the beginning, I started working with Eduardo Grampin about 6 or 7 years ago on a project about digital TV for citizen participation, which then led to this, which is that last night we created the Technology Participation Lab. We created this a couple of hours ago, actually. And so far, this was a team that had created only one project. But it is a really interesting project focused on citizen participation and digital technologies. And that project that was developed between 2021 and 2022 was conducted by a team made up of research professors of 3 schools from Universidad de la República, which are the School of Engineering, the School of Social Sciences, and the School of Information and Communication. Mainly, we had the natural language team from the School of Engineering, although in the upcoming months, we will have colleagues from system integration join the team. On the side of information and communication school, we have professors connected to organizational communication and educational communication. And then we have a lot of people from poli-science from the School of Social Sciences. Now, this team entered into an agreement with AGESIC. AGESIC was interested in strengthening what at that time was known as e-participation. The idea is that Uruguay has good indicators for its digital agenda, but it doesn't have really good indicators for citizen participation in digital technologies. So we wanted to develop something a bit more powerful. And now I will share a presentation with you to explain what I mean. It just has a couple of images. Can you see it? Yeah? Great.
En el desarrollo, bueno, acá capaz que vale la pena detenernos un poquito en el proyecto anterior que
So the previous project It's a project that we developed together with Eduardo Grampin and his team from the School of Engineering. Just for you to understand this, since it's connected to the new project, this was a project that entailed testing, exploring, and assessing the possibility of using digital interactive television. This is something that we didn't actually develop in the end here in Uruguay. Actually, it wasn't developed anywhere in the region. The interactivity of digital television is not present right now, albeit digital television is present, however, not with possibilities for interaction. From the beginning, we knew that albeit this project had been funded by the Ministry of Industry, under that title, we would not be able to include the interaction factor. In the work that we conducted, there was a television show and an app, a web app, that enabled citizens to participate before the program, providing input for what they will be seeing in the program. During the program, then you would see how people had interacted with it. And after the program, there were different functions that are here. There were functions that enabled people to share their experience after the show. There were others that enabled them to share their opinions. There was a survey as well that enabled people to answer to standardized questions, whereas at the beginning the text was freely introduced by users. If people wanted to make an opinion, complete the survey, or say something, they needed to register. But they could also see the platform without registering to look at the comments and the opinions of people. And this entailed different participation levels or orbits. And this graph goes to show that in processes such as the one that I just described, when we use technologies or if we do not use them, there is a large portion of people that watch, that observe, and there is a rather smaller group that participates more or less actively. Those that are the most active represent the smallest circle. And when we look at how many those are, if we look at everyone that connected, it is a very small percentage. It's less than 5%. Okay? So we could say, hey, how disappointing. We shared all of these technology devices with people and put them at their service, and yet only 5% of them are active, and only 18% was less active, but at least they were doing something in the platform apart from just observing. And then there were many who registered but never intervened. And then there is a very large number of people that just watch. However, this is not strange. And this is input for us to think about digital participation of citizens. And if we look at all other cases, we see the same thing happen with or without technology. So we might wonder why include digital technologies? Well, because there are many advantages. Now, in this work that we conducted, there's a lot of material available, and we entered into an agreement with the TV Ciudad channel, which is the television channel of the city of Montevideo. And there's a platform that we created if you want to know about it. But then we moved into a project with AGESIC, and we did several things with them. And there were three basic stages for that work. First, we wanted to cooperate international experiences of citizen participation using technologies and compare them to national experiences with a moderate or null use of digital technologies. We wanted to compare to understand how participation processes worked, even if there were or weren't those digital technologies available. So we took a set of cases to analyze. Some cases were European, as was obvious, and they might actually have allowed, they may allow us to cooperate with those countries in the future. In particular, one of the most interesting cases was the case of Spain that has two projects developed, which are the projects in Madrid and Barcelona. Madrid developed a citizen participation platform about 5 years ago, and then later on, Barcelona took that case as an example, initially used the same platform and then added things to it, and then they decided to develop something of their own. That last experience is the experience that, after a very long process, we recommended Uruguay use. And we can look at it if you want later on.
Está usando en muchas partes.
Decidime is a platform that is being used across the world currently in many parts of the world. But in our work, we worked with use cases based on a research that we conducted with political and social stakeholders in the country. Together with them, we identified the need for the use of digital tools in different processes. We found 51 use cases, and they were grouped as you see here. They wanted functions that would allow for individual participation, such as giving opinions, proposing initiatives, and commenting those of others. Others that have to do with collective interaction, which are features that allow for deliberation, exchanging opinions, collective development, agreements about discussion agendas of any group. We also want different social groups to be represented, which might seem minor, but it's very complex, because in these kinds of platforms, you normally access with your individual ID, and it is hard for you to identify yourself as a union, a group of neighbors, or any other collective group. Solutions have been found for this, but it's not simple. There are features for moderation and for the management of participation. There are conversations that sometimes take place in those platforms that are complex, where a lot of people are saying a lot of things in the same digital space. So how do we moderate that? How do we help so that that could be understood by everyone who accesses the platform, where there are hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of comments from people? Sometimes it's not text, sometimes it's audio files or videos, and then that's even more complex. Other files or features allow to manage our understanding of the process itself or to understand external aspects. Sometimes there are experts that are providing information and reports, etc. Now, there is a specifically complex problem here, not from the digital technological perspective, but from the feasibility of proposals and their analysis. And that is where some systems have failed, because they stimulate people participate and share proposals, but in order for governments to commit to those proposals. Apart from citizen opinion, we need to analyze the feasibility of those proposals, and we need human resources for that. For example, Madrid ran into specific difficulties with that. They got hundreds of proposals and they committed to assessing their feasibility and viability. However, they were unable to do it. And this is not a technological issue, but it does require for the use of digital tools that will facilitate that analysis. We also need to find a way to manage tasks of committees or work groups. For example, I participate in an honorary committee of audiovisual services. It is a consulting organization made up of stakeholders connected to the area of audiovisual communication, such as TV business people or radio business people, then journalists and unions, and I represent academia there. And managing all the information that they get, having minutes of meetings and have everything organized is not simple. As a matter of fact, the state organization that manages this uses a tool that it is really not suitable for the task. It is a tool that was being used for something else, and now they're using it for that. There are better tools, though, and that's something that you need to consider. You need features that allow for discussing activities, for sharing information with people that are outside of this scope so that they might actually participate. We also need facilitating tools that provide help so that those who access the platform might understand what it is about and how to use it, which is not simple. We also need audiovisual support, which is something that the platforms didn't have before the pandemic. Now there was an explosion in those supports during the pandemic because it allows for the integration of platforms within the platforms and of many audiovisual tools. And then we need to have technical features to configure systems, authenticate registration and logins, and that has been a headache in those platforms. In Uruguay, as a matter of fact, that was an issue. And 10 days ago, I was talking to people from the Brazilian government, and they told me that that was also a headache in Brazil, albeit now after the vaccination in the pandemic, everyone was given a digital ID. So everything is working properly. But when they wanted to integrate the Catalan platform with the Brazilian ID, they ran into hardship. And it was consoling to hear that because we ran into those troubles here. And it goes to show that we all have similar experiences, even if we're different. Now, there were many tools across the world that had these features, and we analyzed what those features were, which tools they had, and we then ranked those tools to see how they were operating in all of these areas, which are about 50 something areas. And then we also looked at more technical aspects, such as how robust their development was, whether they were available in multiple languages, et cetera. Whether the platform provided accessibility for everyone, such as people with hearing impairments or eyesight impairments. And based on all of that, we recommended the Uruguayan government adopt DECIDIM, apart from other things that the Uruguayan government has not done. They only use the basic tool, which is the DECIDIM, and nothing else. Now, during the second stage, after the analysis stage, And once the tool was installed, we ran some pilot tests for concrete use cases. One of them with the URSEC. There was a public consultation for a rather technical topic, and we see a repetition of what we had seen in the case of our first project, whereas there was very little citizen participation. So there were people that generated proposals, others commented those proposals, and then other people just provided support. And then there were people that were just looking from the outside. This wasn't surprising at all, but it is something to be mindful of. Over here, we can see a list of different tools that are available. I'm going to show you one. Can you see the one of Uruguay that I just opened? Can you see it on my screen? We cannot, we just see your presentation.
Lamentablemente que salir y entrar de vuelta.
Oh, I'm sorry. I need to leave the presentation and show my screen. Just a second.
Ahí está, vamos a volver a compartir porque no hay otra forma en Zoom o yo nunca la he encontrado. No, esta es la de Brasil, vamos a ver. Bueno,
This is the Brazilian platform. Do you see it? Yeah? Yeah.
Bueno, acá está la plataforma que Brasil está usando en este momento desde marzo.
This is a platform that Brazil has been using ever since March of this year, and between April and August 2023, they used it very intensively. This is created on the basis of ISEED. It's called Participatory Brazil, and between April and August, they created the PPA, which is the pluriannual plan, which is a 4-year plan for the Brazilian government. And if you go in there, you will see that this process has already been completed. You see the programs prioritized, the proposals that were voted for, and you see the draft law that was sent to the parliament after the discussion. Over here, we have some numbers of interest. And I told you that the Brazilian case is the most intense case. There were 4 million accesses registered in the platform and about 1.5 million participants, which are very big numbers. Actually, people were fearful that the platform would not be able to resist all the traffic. However, this is only 1% of the Brazilian population that participated. This happened in articulation with a face-to-face participation project with councils that met through the months. So what was happening was that those councils and those conferences were taking place with the participation of organizations of the civil society, of professionals and companies. And at the same time, people could participate at the individual basis through the platform. They could share proposals, they could share their opinions about proposals that were presented by others. So the challenge of the Brazilian government was to articulate those two things. So that was a very complex challenge that entailed processing hundreds of proposals, in this case, thousands of proposals, which were actually 8,254. So that was very complex indeed. And I spoke to people from the government 10 days ago about this, because they have the Social Participation Secretariat and they have a Digital Participation Bureau in the Secretariat. and I had a high-level meeting with the secretariat and with the people from the different areas.
Entonces, hay mucho para aprender de estas.
So there is a lot for us to learn from these experiences. And now I will tell you about the Uruguayan experience so that you may have an idea about it. At this point, Uruguay is going through the elections of the Advisory Honorary Council of Civil Society for people who are disabled. And if you look at this, if you can see it, there were processes that took place before. First, we reviewed the digital citizenship strategy or the AI strategy or the National Plan of Action Plan for Human Rights. We have other processes as the one that I just showed you. So these are specific things we can do with the platform. We can choose in an election, or we can have more complex debates, such as reviewing the digital citizenship strategy that entails meeting face to face, talking about proposals, organizing them, etc., etc. So there are times for public consultations, there are different stages. There is a work group about digital citizenship that was created a while ago, and this is an ongoing process that will be completed in January 2024 because not all stages are completed. Now, to wrap up, I want to go back to my presentation. And I know that we are over time now, but I would like to show you the analysis dimensions that we use to think about these projects. Because when we think about citizen participation processes, and in particular about processes that use digital tools, after you look at experiences and you compare them with theoretical tools, we decided to conduct an analysis that we believe is suitable and that we suggest others use, that focus on 4 dimensions: a political institutional dimension, a sociocultural dimension, a methodological and design dimension, and a digital or virtual dimension. Because we ran out of time, I just want to mention some things about these dimensions. To the left, in the chart, you see factors that strengthen participation, and to the right, you see those that go against that participation. And in the middle, you see factors that entail tensions in the participatory processes. That is, things that cannot just favor those dimensions or go against those dimensions, but rather that they create tension. Something that favors participation is having clear institutional frameworks that are flexible and that have been co-built by all stakeholders. And something that goes against that participation, which might seem obvious, is that the agreements are unclear, not explicit, or rather vague. Now, the question is, who has to participate? What do they decide on and what can't they decide? Is this space for asking questions, or can people actually make decisions and vote? If this isn't clear, for example, beforehand, participation will most likely drop in time because people don't really understand why they're participating and what for. Then in the social-cultural dimension, for example, it is very different if the stakeholders have a very strong previous experience in organizations or if they don't. If they have never gathered before and they are gathered for this, they might not respond in the same way. And if they're not gathered because they're participating individually, then that's a whole other thing. When we have previous organizations that they come from, that might facilitate the discussion. However, that might also go against that participation because those organizations might decide not to engage in the process and they might actually exclude individuals. For example, you have someone new come in and they are told that they don't understand what's going on, they really have no idea what they're talking about, and those that are already a part of the system do. And that really goes against their participation. Then there are design factors that are key. For example, do we have expert moderation? Are we lacking moderation? Moderators in any space for debate are clearly necessary. And a lot of people complain frequently, saying, I participated in a meeting of a committee, but we were all talking and nobody moderated. So in the end, we lost everything because nobody was organizing the debate. Well, that happens in digital debates as well. And it happens even more in digital debates than it does in face-to-face debates. Because in face-to-face debates, sometimes we don't have a clear moderator in sight, and yet someone undertakes the role. And lastly, we have the digital dimension or the virtual dimension, because it's not the same to propose the use of digital tools and participatory processes when everyone has good access to those tools, access in the technical sense and in the infrastructure sense, such as in having good devices and good internet access, as well as the possibilities of doing a proper, reasonable use of those tools. Now, we could say that in countries such as Uruguay, that is almost guaranteed, but we shouldn't be that optimistic. Mostly because of use. And together with this, one of the things that all those processes have learned is that we should have complementarity between what is face-to-face and what is digital. We should use both supports. Now, in general, digital tools include people that would not participate if they had to go to face-to-face meetings, but they also exclude people that only participate in face-to-face meetings and that would hardly participate if the meetings are only virtual. So those were the things that we analyzed that pertain to the potential and the boundaries of digital tools for participation. Now, after this project with AGESIC, we worked on another experience and we wrap up about 3 weeks ago that was very enriching, that leads to the scope of civil organizations in a course that we called Democratic Innovation, Social Participation, and Digital Tools, that brought together stakeholders from the government, but mostly social organizations that come from Uruguay and from other 6 Latin American and European countries. Now, all of this makes us think about things that are similar from the ones that I showed you in the chart, but it makes us think about other different things that I will mention right now. But there are other elements that we should bear in mind when we think about these topics. Thank you. And now, sorry, I want to mention one. When we bring in social organizations, the CIDIM becomes a no-go because they demand for a capacity to manage and customize and provide support that those organizations normally don't have. Just to mention one technological aspect. In the case of Barcelona, they are trying to solve this by bringing together a team of the Decidim platform that provides support for social organizations. But in my most recent conversation with them, where we invited them to participate in the course that I mentioned, they recognize that very few organizations want to participate with those tools. However, there are other tools that are much more manageable that seem more suitable for a small organization. And we have also been researching this and exchanging experiences with people from other places. The lab that we founded last night will begin working to see how they can work with governments and civil society. And that's it for me.
Conversar lo que quiera.
Muy bien, muy bien. Muchas gracias, Gabriel, por...
Thank you, Gabriel, for your presentation. We will now open up the floor for questions or comments from the speakers. If you want to participate, raise your hand.
Sara, ¿te escuchamos?
Hola.
Hola.
Ah,
Sarah, you have the floor.
me fue curioso ver el caso brasileño.
I was
Entonces,
curious to hear from the Brazilian case. It was interesting.
tal vez si puedes traducir la
And could you
pregunta de Magda,
translate Magda's question, maybe?
porque lo he hecho una pregunta en
Magda
inglés,
asked a question
entonces
in English.
puede traducirla.
Maybe someone can translate it?
Thank you for the great presentations. Oh, entonces hace una pregunta.
La estoy leyendo aquí en inglés.
Sí.
I am reading it in English. I just saw it in the chat.
Ah, entiendo, sí.
Okay, perfect. I understand. I'm sorry she's not here. I understand the question. I think I understood the question. Should I answer now? How do we do this? Go ahead, Gabriel. Answer. I think I already answered that. That was the last thing I said. First of all, we have the individual users, and then we have the organizations that implement the use of digital tools and participatory processes. Now, pertaining to users, we have a problem that I included in the last chart.
O tres, diría yo.
I would say that there are three obstacles for users. The easiest obstacle that we can work on is the obstacle presented by the tool in terms of its usability. There are usability issues, but we can surpass them. An example of this with very easy solutions is Decidima and other tools such as Decidima are very easily configurable. So you can choose what you use and what you don't in the tool, what you enable and what you don't. And one thing that those who carry out implementations do is turn off or hide everything that might be a nuisance or that won't be used for each particular process. This simplifies the work. Even if that's the case, that doesn't always solve the problem. Now, there is another obstacle, which is digital consumption habits. Why? Because most people normally use very few tools, such as messaging tools and social networks. They use WhatsApp, they use Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and that's it. And what doesn't look like those tools becomes hard for them to use. Now, there's things that are similar, but then there are other things that are not that similar. And the question is, why not just use social networks if they're so easy for people to use? Well, because of a multiplicity of reasons. Mostly, and this is key, is that those tools can integrate to social networks and to messaging services. We can have integrations. For example, the conversation available in social networks that is happening in Facebook, for example, can be redirected to the platforms. And then there's another obstacle, which is that you need to identify yourself, you need to log in. Now, this shouldn't be such a complex thing, right? Because networks also call for an initial login, and once you have a user, you don't have any issues. But what these platforms have done is allowed for people to log in using the already existing social network users. You can create a user or you can log in using your Facebook or Instagram ID, for example, right? But when you have to decide, none of these platforms allow for that because they want to have a guarantee that a real citizen is the one making the decision, is voting, for example, right? So there, for example, in the case of Brazil, they would ask for a Brazilian ID, or in Uruguay, we ask for Uruguay. Brazil actually is doing better than Uruguay in having people have that digital identity. As a matter of fact, UI has different levels of identification. The safest level requires for a face-to-face procedure to be entered into. That is because the government of Montevideo, who has a participation platform, which I didn't show, which is called Montevideo Decide and now Montevideo Participa, but it's the same tool, uses Consul, Madrid's tool, because they had worked with that and then making changes was hard for them. Um, it would be better if they used Decidim for technical reasons, because Decidim has a very big community across the world, and that guarantees better support.
Ahora. Y por
But oh
ejemplo,
well, that's what we have now here for Montevideo. And the participatory budget of Montevideo uses this platform that is based on consult so that people can vote for this. And if you want to vote, you need to have your digital ID that you create through internet, and then you need to go to an office and register as well. So people say, well, I mean, I'm just going to vote. Why am I going to do all of this digitally? So there are very few people that vote through the platform. However, there are a lot of people that propose things and share their opinion through the platform. So I would say those are the most typical barriers. For the first one, yes, there are problems, but a lot of work is being done to improve on usability.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Gabriel.
Thank you, Gabriel. Daniela, you have your hand up. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your presentations. They were very interesting. Now, Gabriel, I have a question for you and take advantage of what you said, because in the project we've seen how social networks participate in terms of debates and having the different stakeholders state their positions. So I wanted to know whether these platforms polarize public debate or not. I want you to tell us if you believe they are useful as spaces for exchange. I just wanted your comments on that. Thank you.
Buenísimo, mira, justo anoche hablábamos de este tema, problema, porque además como el año
Well, last
empieza
night we were talking
las
about
elecciones
this
en Uruguay,
because next year is an election year here. So these things can become more
entre
problematic.
uno de los proyectitos que nos
And
pusimos
one of the
para
projects
trabajar esta
that
temática
we are
es este
focusing
tema de
on for next year is to
polarización
work on
y
that,
polarización. En
which
ese
is public
sentido,
debate and
dentro de estas propuestas,
polarization.
herramientas, no esta decidime en particular, ahí les menciono una, no importa.
Now, in that sense, there are many tools.
Polis,
One of them is Police,
la pueden buscar y
and you
encontrarla.
can look for it
Es una
online,
herramienta bien interesante
which is a really
justamente para
interesting
trabajar sobre este
tool
problema
to
de la
work on
polarización del
this
debate público.
problem about the
Porque permite
polarization of
identificar
public debate.
mejor autoubicarse los actores, cómo están en la
Because it
escena,
allows for
actores y en este
stakeholders,
caso a personas, cómo
individuals
pueden
that
posicionarse
is,
frente a
to
discusiones
see where they stand
en qué
on
punto
different
del
matters,
continuum se
and they
encuentran
can see
ellos.
where in the
Entonces se puede
continuum
ver
they are.
si
If they are
estos diferentes
polarized
actores
on
son
one side, on
capaces
the
de
other, or if they are able
autorreconocer
to recognize
que no están necesariamente en un polo u otro, aunque crean
that
estarlo,
they are
o que
not
comparten algo en
standing at a
común
pole,
con quienes opinan
but
diferente.
rather
Y
they
sobre
share
todo en problemas
more
complejos,
than they
no se
believe
trata
with
solo
people
de
that have different
opiniones,
opinions from them,
sino
especially in
sí,
terms of
pero con ciertas
complex matters,
características.
matters
Por
that
ejemplo,
cannot
problemas de
be
seguridad.
resolved with
¿Por
yes or
qué
no
el debate
answers.
público
You know,
entre
like
otros está
safety
preocupante?
issues.
Luis lo mencionaba para El Salvador.
Safety is an issue across all of our
¿Usted cree que la
countries.
policía
So if I
debe
ask, do you
entrar a
believe the
puertas de casa?
question,
Ahora
should
ese tema
break
está
into
polarizando, ¿no?
houses at night?
Ya ese tema, aunque sea solo ese,
Well, that is a
ya
topic
no
that
se contesta únicamente
polarizes.
sí o no, ¿no?
And it's
Sino que
not
hay que
yes or
profundizar
no.
un
It
poco,
is
¿no?
yes,
Digo,
but with
bueno,
conditions,
ya empieza a ser más
or
complejo.
no,
Ahora,
but with
vamos a crear un
conditions. And
conjunto
then
de
when we
actores
add
que
other
se
things,
puede haber allanamientos
which
nocturnos
is
o
can you have
permanentes
police
con
break-ins at
armas
night, or if people can
multifuncionales o en cuál
carry
sitio, en cuál otro,
weapons
etcétera.
in all cases or use weapons in
Debe
all
haber
cases,
una
yes,
cierta
no, etc.
para
Do we have specialized
crear
police?
un
Yes, no.
consenso
I
sobre
mean,
este tema. Los ciudadanos no están
there's a
dispuestos
multiplicity
a
of
que se
topics where
y bueno,
citizens
policía
really
también
don't
te
just
ayuda
answer yes or no, and
a
police
si es probable que
allows
algún
for
ciudadano
people to
podría
see where they
identificar
stand in the
este signo positivo
spectrum.
con alguno de los temas
And
de
maybe next year we
polarización.
will be
¿Por
carrying
qué
out a
me
similar
parece
experience in the
interesante?
public
Porque
debate.
muchas
And police can be
veces cuando
integrated
hacemos
with
preguntas
similar
de política
tools. It is
pública,
possible,
este
albeit there
caso de
aren't
reformas
that
que es
many
la de Uruguay o la de Brasil, estas, ¿no?
experiences for this.
Consultas, planes, etcétera, han ido también incorporando y mejorando
Now, in
propuestas, pero
Brazil,
todavía hay mucho por
we
delante.
have seen a lot of development in these areas, but there is still a long way to go. One thing that concerned us,
La calidad
and that remains a
del
concern,
debate y sobre todo la
is the
discusión.
quality of the
Puede
debate.
haber muchas propuestas parecidas que no dialogan entre sí. Eso es un
There might be
riesgo y
proposals that
sobre
are
todo
similar but don't
decidir, por ejemplo, ha
talk to each other.
incorporado la herramienta
Now,
de
the CDIM has included AI tools
parte
that
mejorada. Eso es un poco
enable
la propuesta
us
de
to
Luis.
understand that better. So when you present something there and you're writing it down, you get a pop-up saying there's a similar proposal. And so it leads you to look at it so that rather than write your own proposal, you can comment on and enrich someone else's. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, yes, but that is also a long step. In Brazil, I was talking yesterday to someone who is the first director of digital participation of the Brazilian government. And she was sharing something with me, which is that the CDM didn't have something that Brazil developed. They added a space where you could discuss text by paragraph. Imagine there is a complex proposal, which is very long. It has a lot of pages, a lot of articles. So it enables people to discuss each article. Or if it doesn't have articles, because it's a plan that explains motives and objectives, then it enables you to discuss each paragraph and make comments about each paragraph and make opinions about them. Well, that enriches the quality of the debate, for sure. Now, in terms of moderation, how automatic might that moderation be? Well, you need to use a lot of AI and a lot of natural languages and develop them further. I mean, one might say that the networks do this better. Well, yeah, much better or much worse. Because the research from our colleagues show us how certain networks are particularly polarizing. I recommend you read the work of an Argentinian colleague, Natalia Ruete, who did it together with Evan Suliaker, and they studied the Argentinian case that has strong political polarization components, and they study how that happens across different networks. And some of them are particularly prone to polarization. Twitter, which is now known as X, is a very polarizing network. It is useful to understand polls, but it is bad for democratic debates.
Muchas gracias, Gabriel.
Thank you very much,
Tenemos
Gabriel.
2 minutitos para alguna
We have
pregunta
2
más.
more minutes if anyone has another question. If not, we're done. Mark,
Adelante.
go ahead.
Y hola, un gusto.
Hi,
Me parece fascinante
it is a
esto,
pleasure to be here, and I think this
simplemente
topic
yo
is
tenía dos
fascinating.
preguntas.
Now, I have
Una,
2
una de
questions.
orden, digamos, histórico
One is more
y otra
historical,
más que tal vez es más interesante en el contexto de RedCLARA y de Vela.
and another that has to do more with Red Clara and Vela.
Esos desarrollos que son desarrollos digitales, obviamente,
Those develop, in the first one, those
eran
developments, those
recientes.
digital developments that
No
are
sé si
recent,
como se insertan en el,
are they
en el movimiento
inserted in the
que ya hubo desde los años,
movement
los años 90, pero sobre
that
todo los
has
años
been
90,
ongoing
de
since
de las,
1990 and the
como
2000s,
de la gestión a nivel de ciudades, de
focused
los foros
on the
estratégicos en Barcelona y España. Me acuerdo
management of cities,
que hubo
in
muchos,
particular in Spain.
una construcción institucional
I
compleja
recall there was a
para
complex
el
institutional
terreno
construction of citizen participation on the ground
en América Latina
that
y
also
también en Montevideo
echoed
en
in
Argentina,
Latin
varias
America.
ciudades, pero simplemente sí, el contexto histórico. Y la otra
So
ciudad,
that's from the historical context perspective. And the other question
interesada por nuestra parte, me parece esas herramientas
is
como que no sé si serían
that
herramientas que pudieran
are those
servir a nivel
tools
de
useful also
gobernanza
at
de
the level of
ecosistemas.
governance for ecosystems?
O sea, más allá, o sea, las ciudades son ecosistemas de por sí.
I mean, citizens are ecosystems, right?
Clara, por ejemplo, está constituyendo
But Red Clara, for
un
example,
ecosistema para la gestión del
is
proyecto
an
Vela 2
ecosystem for the Bella 2
y
project in particular.
parecían ser como, no sé, es una pregunta abierta, ¿no? Obviamente, pero que
This
creo
is
que
an open
son
question, of
herramientas
course.
interesantes para ecosistemas complejos donde
I want to
a
mention
nivel
this because I think
de
these are
ciudades,
interesting
a diferentes
tools
niveles
for
inclusive,
complex
no sé,
ecosystems where
ciertamente
stakeholders at different levels can participate. I wonder
ese
if
tipo
they might be able to
son
cooperate based on those
interesantes
tools. Thank you.
en todo caso.
Mirá, dos respuestas breves. La
Two
primera,
brief
sin duda, tiene
answers.
todo que ver con eso. Y no
The first one is yes, undoubtedly. This is connected to
herramientas de este tipo son
that.
gobiernos especialmente interesados en la participación
And the
ciudadana.
governments are particularly interested in citizen participation and And this is all very much connected to the movements of the 2000s. I was in Ecuador a couple of weeks ago, and it has a participation act that foresees citizen participation in ways that Brazil and Uruguay do not foresee. And in the training that we provided, we had participants from Ecuador who shared truly interesting ideas. For example, they have the figure of the empty chair, which is to have a citizen go into an organization and share their opinion. It is a mechanism of Andean countries, actually. Spain has that track record, and we also have it in Latin America.
Todo fue el de Porto Alegre, ¿no? En los años 90, comienza ahí
The
antes de
first case of citizen participation was in Brazil, in Latin America, with participatory budgets in Porto Alegre. Now, what has been happening in the past few years is that we have incorporated these digital tools that we didn't have before that brought with them novelty. Because, yes, they can be facilitators, but they also allow for the inclusion of new participants and new possibilities. This is all, of course, under discussion. There are stakeholders that say that this has not contributed to participation processes, that they have made them more complex. Now, pertaining to the use of tools such as these ones in RedCLARA or in spaces that bring together a multiplicity of stakeholders, I would say that it is feasible to use them, yes, but we need to be very careful with the tool that we use. We need to think about the processes. We need to do what we did. What are the use cases that are necessary? And based on them, what are the useful tools for that? The CDIM actually has a very large community at the international level, albeit it is based in Barcelona, in particular in Spain. And they had the Decidim Fest last week, which is an annual event that bring in civil society, governments, academia, and people from across the world. There were actually colleagues from Brazil that went to the festival to share their experience, and they have a very active life, not just during the fest, right? And in that time, they don't use Decidim. I mean, they do, but they don't. They were going to use it, but they didn't. So they're probably communicating through other channels. I forgot to ask them actually in my last conversation, but I will. I will ask them what they're using because you have people from a lot of places. You have developers, you have people from government, people from academia, you have very different people, and I want to know what they're doing and how they are connecting and managing their conversations. If they tell us they use WhatsApp groups, we want to kill ourselves, right? Because we develop all of this and then we go back to what we normally do when we don't know what else to use. So what I would say is, yeah, it could be really interesting to use those tools. And what we want to do, and I am announcing this today, is to carry out one of these experiences in our university for 2024. In the next few days, we're going to be talking about that with the authorities of the university. It is only one university, it's not as complex as RedCLARA, but at the same time, our university, as all big public universities are, is very complex because of the number of actors.
Sería es no agarrar simplemente una herramienta
What I would insist on is don't just take any tool and use it, but rather look at use cases and then try to analyze what are the tools that provide you with the best response. If you want, we can share a methodological tool that we have developed for the analysis of tools, which is something that we created That is, what are the categories that you can use, what to analyze, how to analyze, what a digital tool wants to facilitate participation gives you, what it doesn't give you, and how much it gives you, and with what quality. With what quality of use and with what technical quality. That's something we developed. It took a significant work from the team. But first, of course, you need to have use cases. What do I want this for? Okay, if I want it for this, then there are these particular tools that might be useful. And how useful are they? Well, we had to analyze that. None of them are perfect, though. Nothing is 100% perfect, but some are more powerful than others, and some might be integrated to others as well. If we don't have one that solves everything, then I can have two integrated ones, or two or three, or X amount of tools. That's it. Ooh, we went over time, sorry. Okay, thank you. Thank you to the presenters, thank you to the interpreter, thank you to all the members. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. We are available. If you have any more questions, you can send them to us and we can share them with Gabriel and the team. And well, that is it. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Luis, also. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.